You are so close to the end of the 2025 50 Most Relevant series. Number 6 today. A player that, gonna lie, has bounced up and down my top 10 all throughout this off and pre-season for good and for challenging reasons. We will address all of those today on the episode of the 50 Most Relevant. It's the players that I believe we must have a conversation about before the start of the AFL Fantasy SuperCoach and Dream Team season in a ranked order with a subjective list of the players I say we must talk about before we lock away our sides. Joining me on this podcast is one of my favourite people to speak fantasy footy with. We regularly have way too long a keeper conversations. We often put them in for the Patreons to be able to hear and enjoy it. So become a Patreon and you can check out our keeper ranks conversations through there. He's been a part of the coaches panel for a number of years now. He's had a few weeks away from the coaches panel podcast, but he's back on deck right near the top of the tree talking Nick Daicos. To do so, it's Kane. Hello, mate. Nice to see you.
Hey, good to see you, MJ. Yeah, it's hard to get on these days. You got guests from everywhere now. The OGs sort of have to just pick and choose and fill the gaps, which we're more than happy to do. But when you said Nick Daicos, 100%, I just jumped at the chance to get back on.
And as you should. A seasonal average last year of 104.7 in AFL Fantasy was a little unders what I think people were anticipating he would deliver for us in 2024. And yet, despite that, we are still forking out well over $1 million to get our hands on him across AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. While SuperCoach, another dynamic season from him. 117.2 was the seasonal average and coming in at a price point of $631,400. Last year, across the formats, there was one game that ultimately became his season high and career high scores across all of the formats. In SuperCoach, it was against Melbourne. In that game, he absolutely brained it for us with a 186. That is a season and career high. While the same too for AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, a 157. It's incredible, Kane, to just think what he has achieved already so young in his career. Been far and above probably one of the greatest Brownlow medal pole players we've ever seen in his career, and arguably unlucky already to not add a Brownlow medal to his premiership medallion and a list of other media accolades and AFL industry accolades that have come his way. This may just be the greatest footballer we are seeing at the very edges of his start point of his career. And I know that feels very hyperbolic to say, but when you think about what he does on the football field, how he commands, and then how he uses his exquisite skill to impact the game, to move his team forward, and now to have done what he's done in not even a handful of seasons and not even 100 AFL games, it's extraordinary what Nick Daicos has achieved already as a footballer.
Oh, it's amazing, Jay. Like to think about a guy that's had 3 seasons. His career average is, nearly over 100 already across the formats, and the impact, as you flagged, with the 2 near Brownlow medal wins already. It's just ridiculous. We've seen a couple of guys, burst onto the scene and be incredible players, but it feels like, Nick, inside of his second season, was already considered one of the best players in the comp. Backed it up last year, despite the Pies having, a dip after winning the flag. But I think the thing that jumps out to me, MJ, off the bat is dominated 2023 as a half-back, creating from there, and then has a change to an inside mid and dominates from there. So that's where when we project forward to 2025 and beyond, I think that's what's so exciting is this guy can score anywhere. He can impact the game from anywhere. And going into his 4th season, he's already the prime mover at Collingwood and one of the best players in the comp.
There was a perception, certainly more from the fantasy football community, that was like, well, yeah, Nick Daicos is a great player, but it's his work rate and easy possessions that he gets is how he scores so well. He's not a in and under contested footballer. He's just handball received, transition, score, and away you go. But he put that myth to absolute bed for us last year. He's top 5 in the league per game for clearances, contested possessions, disposals, and score involvements, let alone then being top 10 in the league for inside 50s and effective disposals. So he's not just run around the back, get the handball receive, kick it 30 metres, run and go again. This is a guy that has added to that skill set, which is truly there, that incredible skill set of high disposal efficiency, high athletic capacity, and then good clean kicking, with this in and under extraction component to the game. He is an incredibly complete footballer, and we're seeing that even in fantasy football translate as well. 13 tons last year in AFL Fantasy off that average of 104.7, 6 tons, only a couple of sub-80 scores in AFL Fantasy, but one of them is injury impacted too. But he's still 13th in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team overall for total points. SuperCoach, 18 tons from that seasonal average of 117.2. 11 scores over 120, so incredible conversion rate of hundreds to 120s. And then 5 scores of 147 plus. And so you get your VC or C on a player like Daicos, you are set. 4th for total points last year in SuperCoach, 8th by average, and has just turned into this elite player across so many facets of his football. And we don't need to talk too long anymore about his brilliance, because I think if you've just watched football over the last 3 seasons, you're like, I get it. This is a star already in the league, let alone a star in the making. But there's been a couple of hurdles that we're going to have to overcome in 2025 when it comes to our considerations of him as a fantasy prospect and when and where we jump into him. Probably the biggest is the fact that the club have come out at numerous reports and said he's been dealing with plantar fasciitis this pre-season and off-season. And while neither you or I have any level of medical abilities, so to speak, that is an injury from someone that moves and runs just as much as Nick does. The discomfort that can be in, it does put a little bit of a red flag against his name, and for understandable reasons.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, MJ, because it can just flare up. You can have it under control, and we've seen in the past that it just rears its ugly head, and unfortunately players have to miss time, or if they do battle through, they're clearly impacted. So that's a bit of a flag. Obviously, any injury in the preseason, we know how important the preseason is now. Like, the competition's never been longer. The preseason is just that time where you prime yourself for, if you're going the whole way, it's a 30-week run all the way from opening round to the grand final nowadays. So the preseason's never been more important. But again, the other information we've got is that he's still a regular part of training. Yes, he missed some time, but as we moved through Jan and Feb, he's out there regularly on the park. So I think we have to back a guy that his conditioning has been incredible and it translates to the footy field. So yes, it's a red flag, but it's far from one where we go put a line through him for the 2025 season.
I think that's important, because when we do hear a management of an injury through the preseason, we just rub a player's name out. And I do understand it, but it is the type of injury that, as you've said, it can be easily managed and it can be easily flared up. The thing that then gets added to the narrative of why we fade away from a Nick Daicos, and these ownership percentages doesn't seem to have the community too far off him, by the way. I know the bulk casual is probably stacking that up at 23% in AFL Fantasy and 36% in SuperCoach at time recording. So it's not exactly like no one wants shares in Nick Daicos this year. But it is this combination of, okay, opening round, meaning an early season bye. Last year, it was a 50-50 split in the community about, yes, but you need a few variables to go your way. It feels a bit more clear-cut across the community, at least around Nick Daicos anyway, as a premium. Doesn't feel like with that opening round bye, let alone the matchups that roll through there, we'll see too many people really gunning against Nick Daicos.
Yeah, it's tricky, MJ, because I think instinctively when you look at his price tag and what we think he can do and how we rate him, he's value for sure. I know it's value at the high end level when we're talking about only maybe needing 5 to 10 points would be an incredible outcome. If he takes his game to a 115 in AF and a 125 plus in SuperCoach, which I think we all believe he's got that season in him. Will it be 2025? Who knows? But you look at last season, you see some of those little ups and downs. Collingwood missed the final, so I think we think for the most part, they're going to bounce back or be stronger in 2025. There's so many things that you go off the bat and just look at him and see where he stacks up and go, oh no, this guy's better than that. This guy's value. This guy's a captaincy option every week. The tricky thing, as you alluded to, is they play opening round, which causes this early bye. And when you look at that first fixture block, obviously we don't have to worry about the Giants game in opening round impacting our points, but obviously it does have a weight on the price movements and all those sort of things that we judge off the back of opening round. But that fixture at the start of the season, there's just a couple matchups in there which, if we're being realistic, they're just not ideal. Yes, it's last year's data, but I think the main one that jumps out to people off the bat, just looking at how he performed in 2024, is that Sydney matchup. James Jordan did a great job of him late in the season. We know James Jordan's one of the best taggers in the game, particularly with those guys that are outside players. I know we just mentioned that Nick is an inside guy, but how good is he transitioning the ball, MJ? Like, that is where you go, this guy is special. Like, this is where he can be a real difference maker, and this is where he can win games of footy. So to see James Jordan do that job last year, the Swans won that game. It's in round 5, so it's like you've got a bye in there. You've got this matchup in round 5. And I think with just the way the season often pans out with our upgrades, once you sort of get beyond round 5, that's when you start accumulating enough cash that you can do your upgrades. So I think for people, they go, gee, it's not the worst thing to have a look, see how these pieces that Collingwood's brought in, see if there's any structural game plan changes, get past a few of these tricky matchups, including a tag. It feels like the stars sort of start aligning for Nick in round 6 and beyond. How do you see that sort of early run, those new faces at the club affecting Nick?
Yeah, I think on the fixture too, it's not just the Swans matchup that is really daunting when it comes off that round 3 bye that they sit. It's Port Adelaide in the first round off the back of a potential Toby Bedford tag in opening round. So you've got 3 of the teams that are either known for being heavily restrictive to inside points, and 2 guys that, from at least a makeup perspective, look like the right type of players that can run with a Nick Daicos. Now, he's shown last year a propensity to work through a tag a lot better than he did in his second season, which is understandable. He would have spent all of the 2024 preseason training for that. And with the training load he will have built into this year, I think that's only improved. But I look at that fixture and I do go, oh, opening round bye is hard enough. Then let alone those 2 fixtures either side, and you throw the plantar fasciitis uncertainty in it, it does become a real dark cloud to say, yes, with confidence, I will start Nick Daicos. But let's try to clear those clouds a bit, because as you alluded, there are some changes that have come to Collingwood that I am convinced help Nick Daicos last year. You mentioned this transition movement away from halfback, playmaker, into an inside mid, in and under player. They lost any sort of rebound, run and carry off halfback last year. Isaac Quaynor was just not himself last year. He looked a shell of himself, both in a one-on-one defensive setting, but also from a run and carry perspective. John Noble has now since departed the club. Even Darcy Moore was, for the first half of the year, was getting slammed in the media for play on players, mate. Don't just sit in the pocket and hope for someone to help it. Get in there and get dirty. So I felt like their defensive structures lost drastically with his run and carry out of half back, because their midfield was also hemorrhaging. Tom Mitchell, who was their big body extractor, misses so much of 2024. Jordan De Goey constantly in and out of the side with injuries. And so now it's all on Nick Daicos, an aging Scott Pendlebury, and a little bit of Jack Crisp to get it all done in the midfield. So I think the arrival of Houston and Perryman are huge. Anybody that's watched training down at Collingwood has commented regularly about Harry Perryman is playing as a defensive-minded midfielder in at centre-bounce. He is there to use his big body, his frame to, yeah, he can win the ball, but it's to protect, to shepherd, to do the right team things around a midfield with the likes of De Goey, Pendlebury, and also Daicos, who offensively You just want them focused on winning and moving the ball forward, not on the defensive elements of the game. And then a Dan Houston, who's one of the best ball movement and ball creators off half-back. Well, now I see inside mids, Daicos getting protected at stoppage and clearance more than he did before, and yet he's still top 5 in so many core indicators that we look at. And now Houston delivering the ball well off defensive 50 and rebounding and getting that staccato ball movement that they had last year with some kind of ebbs and flows in it. My goodness. Well, we talk about these concerns around the plantar fasciitis and the fixture and the timing of the buys early on. I think there's a great deal of optimism that Nick Daicos owners should be having, because I think these two pieces set Nick up beautifully from a fantasy football perspective to hit that 10 points per game of upside across the formats.
Yeah, MJ, I think that's the thing that gives you some confidence, is that Collingwood just didn't have a great year. Things just didn't go right for them. They're the premiers the year prior. Last year, just naturally, that's the team everyone wants to beat, right? When you're the premiers, especially the way they play with so much energy, and they're never out of any game, and so many guys just had awesome years in 2023. I think just naturally, 2024, there was just some regression there. Some bad luck with injury. A couple of guys, 1 or 2% up. Every team studying their game plan all off season. It's just the way footy works. So for Nick to still deliver what he did, and again, to land those key pieces in a perfect age bracket where it's plug and play. Yes, I'm sure there's a learning curve with any player fitting into a new team, but it just feels like those two areas that they targeted, and those two players in particular, it's like, yeah, that's what they were missing. So I'm really, really interested to see how that mix comes together. But I think the thing with Nick Daicos is we've seen these glimpses already where you go, there's still room for improvement, and yet he's already at a top 8 mid-level comfortably in my eyes. So that's where I say, if there wasn't this buy, I think his ownership would be upwards of 50, 60%. I think the reason it's down in the 20s and 30s across the formats is really just your casual fans. Those people that sign up and they're just going through, I'm going to set a team. Yep. Oh my God, Nick Daicos, how is he only the, 10th best mid? This guy's an absolute star, and he is. So I think the people that listen to the coaches panel and the people that are listening to content in Jan and Feb and have spent this time know about the early season buy. They know about these trickier matchups. And they sort of just honestly know how the game's played, right, MJ? That you don't need everyone at the start. You can't have everyone at the start. You got to map out your upgrades and pick your battles. And I think it's almost too obvious to see that Nick Daicos from round 6 beyond, get him when you can. And that's probably the only risk with him, right? He is that good, and he can be matchup proof, even though there's challenging ones. We've seen him produce big scores. That's probably the only risk and concern that you have, is he can go 160, 170 in SuperCoach any given week. So yes, there is a chance that this value that we're, intrigued by at the start of the season, by round 6, it could be gone. He could just be a guy that's priced at 120 plus in SuperCoach and priced at 110, 115 in AF. And that's a risk. But at the same time, I think we know that he's a guy that you have to leave a spot for in planning your team.
I think why people also like the look of a Nick Daicos in their starting squad, outside of eliminating FOMO, which is a real thing for us with a player like Nick Daicos, because as you mentioned, a 150 on any opponent in any week is absolutely vital and easy to do. Is coaches are looking for options that they have confidence on as a VC or a C option early in the year, where we don't have the volume of options available to put the armbands on. That's where Nick does become a factor. And when you look at where Collingwood's fixtures sit, even if they're not ideal matchups in some of them, they're very, very favourable for people that are looking to him as a captaincy option. Like they play the Saturday night of round 1. So prime last chance VC with potentially a saviour on a Sunday. They play Friday night in round 2. Then they're on the bye in round 3, and they give you a chance to have a blue dot on the field. You shouldn't have any problems finding a blue dot in round 3, by the way. Round 4, they play Thursday night. Round 5, they play Friday night. Round 6, they play Thursday night. Round 7, they play Friday night. Round 8, they play Saturday night. Round 9, they play Thursday night. Round 10, they play Saturday afternoon. Round 11, it's Saturday evening. Around 12, it's Friday evening. Like, you've got to get to round 13 for the King's birthday clash for the first time he's not playing any later than a Saturday night. And so there's this run and world where you go, I know the plantar fasciitis is there. I know the opening round is and the bye is a pain. I know some of the fixture points are there are a pain. And we see those reasons, and then we just tell ourselves the narrative of, he's a VCC on any opponent. He's got great times of when these fixtures land. He's priced in AFL Fantasy with undeniable value, while in SuperCoach we can see a pathway of upside, now with some more support in ball movement and protection in the midfield. The question is not, should you start with Nick Daicos? The question is, when are you getting it? Because the longer you leave it, the harder it's going to be to watch your fantasy footy side.
Yeah, and that's the risk with any of these big dogs, MJ, is you can have this plan, as we know, that, I'm targeting around 6 or 7. You get one injury, you got to fix something. And then, unfortunately, within a couple of weeks, they go back to back 130s, 140s. And now you're talking about paying through the absolute nose. And we've been in those situations in the past where you go, I just can't do it this week. They're going to dip. And you end up getting to this point where you miss a lot of the good scores. You pay at top dollar to just, finally cancel out that advantage everyone has. And then they drop a bad score. We've all been there. It happens every single year. And I think that's where people go, there's value there. I know he's going to be top 8. He can be a captain option. Yes, I'm going to have to eat this early bye that's a little bit troubling. But to be fair, there's still another 7 other clubs that fit in this boat as well. And that is part of the puzzle piece, is going, how many of these guys do I want? Yes, in an ideal world, you always want your premiums to be there every week. But maybe with best 18, it works out. Maybe you can, with the rest of your squad, get by where you go, yes, I'm missing 20 to 30, 40 points by having to play, a lesser player than a Nick Daicos. But maybe it's just worth it to not have that headache of trying to get him in. That's always the things you got to weigh up. We know there's some people that also just play for leagues. So that's another factor where they might just go, you know what, early days, no dramas. But I think most coaches' view will be, let's get through the start of the season. Let's see how it shapes out. Let's see how he's going. Let's get past that tag that we all see coming in round 5. And then let's go from there. But as we said, this guy is that good that he can fight through a tag. He can have these monster ceiling games, and he can erode all that value that we're eyeing off in no time at all. And invariably, as we know, stuff just pops up. Best laid plans can go in the bin in an hour of footy. You lose a couple players to injury. That rookie that you think was going to get named doesn't get named on a Thursday night. Like, that's what makes this game so fun, as we always talk about, is we love the planning side. We love mapping it out.
Yeah.
But there's this flexibility and unpredictability that we just never know. But as I sit here, this guy alongside a Marcus Bontempelli for me, and probably Lockie Neal as the other, especially in a SuperCoach, barring an injury, these are guys that I just feel like are top 8 mids.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of speculation and things that have to variably land for them to become that in a lot of other lanes. Daicos is not one of those guys. Injury and suspension, should either of those things come his way, are the only obstacles I see him to being one of the best premium midfielders, if not one of the best premiums going across the formats year round. Can you start him? Of course you can, and we've mapped out how you can do that. But the evidence does lend itself much more heavily and favourably to a pursuit in season rather than a foundational build around Nick Daicos in your side. But if you don't start, you need a Daicos-shaped space in your midfield, because going a season without him is not fun. If at any point in time over the last 3 years you have watched a Collingwood game and you're not a Nick Daicos owner, every quarter is nerve-wracking, because a 50 to 60 point quarter is in his capacity any quarter. And so just when you think you're getting out of Dodge with maybe a 90 or a low 100, he'll put a 60-point last quarter on his head, and all of a sudden you're staring down a 140. He's a phenomenally gifted footballer and someone that is incredible to own in Classic. But on draft day, you will be the only person that will get your hands on him. Here at the Coaches Panel, we choose to draft on the Keeper platform. It is able and eligible for you to do your drafts right now. So if you haven't brought your Keeper or Dynasty League over, get on in, get involved, be one of the foundational leagues that start. You can do a single season league in there as well, but it's got unrivaled customization. The things you can do as a commissioner and as a fantasy coach are amazing. Everything can be captured and held in the league. It's awesome. The app is super native and easy to use. If you're drafting anywhere in 2025, we at the Coaches Panel believe Keeper is the best platform to do it in every single format of how you like to draft, single, keeper, or dynasty leagues. But where he goes on draft day will really intrigue me, Kane, because there'll be some that understandably look at him as a very early first-round pick. And then there'll be some that have cooled on him due to the plantar fasciitis and some of the off-season stuff. Do you see a world where he slides outside of the first round in any of these formats, or is it more about where he goes in the first?
Oh, I think in an AFL fantasy format, MJ, there will be leagues where he slides out, just because naturally some people just love going for the ruckman, getting some of those defenders away. But for me, though, he's in my top 10 in every format. I just rate him that highly. I just think everything about him, he's already getting attention, still fights through, produces good scores. Maybe the average is another thing, especially in AF, that might allow him to slide in some people's eyes. But again, we know what it's like with leagues, and just sometimes people just go off average, and you don't get him, or maybe there's a ruck run, especially this year, that might push him down. But gee, if you got him on the wraparound in the second round in an AFL fantasy league, you'd be feeling really, really good. In SuperCoach, I just can't see it. The average is too high.
Yeah.
The quality is too high. And there's probably enough question marks around other players that I just can't see him sliding.
Yeah.
I just think he's that good. Again, not to spoil our keeper ranks, but let's be honest, he's right at the very, very pointy end, and he'll probably be there for a long, long time. It's just a unique circumstance that this guy is, even at his age, he's already the alpha in the midfield in a team that I think is very, very good and going to be, pushing right at the pointy end again. So it's amazing that a guy gets that in a team that's super, super quality, but he's the clear leader. Often, as we see with some of the other teams, like the Bulldogs, for example, Bont's the main man, but Libba, Treloar, they're super impressive as well. They've had McRae and Bailey Smith in years past. We know Fredo's got multiple guys. Carlton. Collingwood's a little bit different. They've got a lot of really good players, but from a fantasy sense, a lot of that scoring and weight falls to Nick. So it's almost a perfect situation, which I think is another factor that just tips him over the edge for mine.
And fair enough too. I'm a very similar sentiment, and echo your thoughts too, man. Hey, always a pleasure talking fantasy footy with you, let alone someone as relevant as Nick Daicos. I'm sure it won't be the last time we chat during the pre-season. Appreciate you, mate. I'm sure we'll chat real soon.
Thanks, MJ.
If you want to check out any of the other player episodes that we have done so far of the 50 most relevant, we have done a player a day since January 1 of 2025. Have you caught up, and are you up to date on every single player? Because there's only a handful of names left to go. If you haven't caught up on the audio podcast versions of this, wherever you're listening to this as an audio podcast, you can. If you're watching it on a YouTube episode right now, subscribe, comment below, let me know, what are you doing when it comes to Nick Daicos, and what will he average this year? Inside the description of this episode, all the details of where you can get in touch with us and follow us and join the conversation across our social media platforms, become a Patreon, or get your hands on some coaches panel merch, whether it be the hats, the hoodies, the t-shirts, the pre-season notebooks, the works. It's all there. Make sure you get involved. And as you do that, not only will you look good, you'll support the coaches panel in doing so. You ready for a clue for who's at number 5? Here's a clue for you. Let's see if it narrows it down. Again, no name surprises should be here. Forward eligible. Changed clubs in the off-season. And at their prior club, before moving, had seen a drastic change in role. And the role moved them away from what made them so fantasy relevant for us historically. Who's the player that is now at a new club and is back in that role that has been so fantasy good to us? We will talk about that person who's left the Bulldogs tomorrow.